The game I'm going to show you today ended in a beautiful checkmate, performed by a young American Grandmaster AWONDER LIANG, third youngest American to qualify for the title of Grandmaster at the age of 14. His opponent, two-time Azerbaijan champion Gumay Mamadzadeh. AWONDER starts with the move knight at f3, d5, we have ready opening, g3, the bishop is preparing to develop on g2, c6, very solid, supporting the pawn on d5, bishop goes to g5, bishop develops to g4, short castle, knight jumps to d7, c4, challenging the black center, bishop takes f3. In those particular positions, light square bishop for black is not a strong piece, because it usually surrounded by black pawns on white squares. So bishop takes f3 makes total sense in this position. Bishop takes f3, knight e5, attacking the bishop on f3 and the pawn on c4. Bishop is more important. AWONDER retreats, bishop g2, and knight takes c4. So white sacrificed the pawn, but they have an advantage in development. d3, kicking the knight out, knight retreats to d6, e4, breaking in the center for white, e6, very solid structure, triangle shape of black pawns supporting the pawn on d5. Knight develops to c3, knight e7, possibly with jumping to g6, but white immediately say no to that by the move h4, because now at knight g6 they will play h5 and kick the knight out. Queen d7, hinting that Gunay wants to castle long side, but bishop e3 prevents the long castle, because if a long castle happens now, the white bishop will take the pawn on a7. Exchange the pawns on e4 and knight jumps to c4. Want to exchange the queens and want to challenge the bishop on e3 and double up on white pawns. Queen e2, protecting the bishop on e3 and also saying no to the offer of exchanging the queens. Knight takes e3, queen takes e3, and the knight goes to c8 with the idea to get to squares b6 or d6, because from e7 it didn't have any moves. Rook d1, challenging the queen on d7, the queen moves away, queen goes to g5, attacking the pawn on g7 and not allowing the black square bishop to leave the f8 square, h6, attacking the queen, queen goes back to g4 and knight b6. And now knight would like to jump to c4 and attack possibly the pawn on b2. e5, sacrificing another pawn for white, and the light square bishop becomes very active. Gunay probably was a little scared to take the pawn on e5, although computer shows that this was the best move. It was kind of scary to take that pawn because of on queen takes e5, rook e1, rook goes to an open file with the queen, with the king in the center. The black position is very suspicious. Therefore, the queen did not take the pawn on e5 and the move h5, kicking the queen out, but now the queen can go to g5 and protect the pawn on e5. Knight d7, creating another attack on the pawn on e5, rook e1 supporting that pawn, and g6. And now black wants to develop the bishop on g7 and add another attacker to the pawn on e5. AWONDER says that he doesn't really care about the pawn on e5 anymore and switches his attention to the queen side of the board, moving the queen to c1. And here black make a long castle, and that was a big mistake, but it's not easily understandable why. Queen f4, attacking the pawn on f7, black plays bishop g7, counterattacking the pawn on e5. Now some exchanges happen in this position, queen takes f7, knight takes e5, queen takes e6 check, king goes to b8, and knight jumps to e4, and now the knight has a lot of nice squares to go to, c5, g5, or d6. Black jump to d3, attacking the rook on e1. The rook moves away, and black take the pawn on b2. The knight is protected by the bishop, but still not a good move, because it opens up a b file for the rook, and white immediately moves the rooks there. Rook b1. Exchange of the rooks on d1, but white has another rook that jumps to b file, rook b3, starting to dangerously look at the black king. The king moves away from this file, and knight d6, attacking the pawn on b7, both with the rook and the knight. The rook protects the pawn, rook b8, and here comes the first sacrifice of the game. Beautiful move. Rook takes b7. Rook takes b7. Now queen e8. Check. Queen goes to b8. Now if rook goes to b8, then we have bishop a bishop takes c6 and immediate checkmate. So in this position, queen b8, queen takes c6, and AWONDER is attacking the pinned rook on b7 with 3 pieces: the knight, the queen, and the bishop. a5, pretty much the only move to escape from a checkmate, to create at least one escape square for the king on a7. But here comes another beautiful move, knight c8. And now queen a6 is a real threat. Therefore, the bishop goes to d4, and after queen a6 check, bishop protects the king with the move bishop a7. And here comes knight b6 checkmate. What a beautiful checkmate. If we look at this position, the black king is surrounded by its queen, the rook, the bishop, but instead of helping the king, those pieces actually help white to checkmate the black king, because the bishop is pinned, the rook is pinned. So we have a very interesting variation of a smothered checkmate with so many pieces surrounding black king.